As Jamie stepped outside, he couldn't believe his eyes. There, just a few feet away, was a massive alligator with its powerful jaws clamped onto the doorknob of his neighbor's house. The alligator was fiercely trying to break into the house, scratching and thrashing against the door with its massive tail. Jamie did not know what to do. The only thing he had on his mind was to make sure he called for backup. What could an alligator possibly do here? Click the like button and subscribe for more. Jamie's heart raced as he realized the danger his neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, was in. Without wasting a second, he dialed 911 and alerted the police about the intruding alligator. The operator on the other end of the line was initially skeptical, thinking it might be a prank call, but Jamie's panicked voice and detailed description of the situation convinced them otherwise. Jamie's heart raced as he realized the danger his neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, was in. Without wasting a second, he dialed 911 and alerted the police about the intruding alligator. The operator on the other end of the line was initially skeptical, thinking it might be a prank call, but Jamie's panicked voice and detailed description of the situation convinced them otherwise. While waiting for the police to arrive, Jamie kept a close eye on the alligator, making sure it didn't make any sudden moves toward him or the neighboring houses. He couldn't help but wonder why the alligator was so determined to get inside Mrs. Johnson's house. While waiting for the police to arrive, Jamie kept a close eye on the alligator, making sure it didn't make any sudden moves toward him or the neighboring houses. He couldn't help but wonder why the alligator was so determined to get inside Mrs. Johnson's house. Within minutes, a patrol car arrived, and Officer Ramirez, a seasoned wildlife expert, stepped out. He was well known in the neighborhood for his experience in handling dangerous animals. Jamie briefed Officer Ramirez on the situation, and they both observed the alligator from a safe distance. Officer Ramirez quickly assessed the situation and realized what had attracted the alligator to Mrs. Johnson's house. He spotted a large pond in her backyard, and it was evident that the alligator had wandered into the neighborhood from the nearby swamp in search of water. As Officer Ramirez tried to come up with a plan to safely remove the alligator, Mrs. Johnson, who had been away on vacation, arrived home. She was shocked to see the commotion and the enormous alligator at her front door. Her face turned pale with fear as she realized the reason behind the alligator's aggressive behavior. Mrs. Johnson explained to Officer Ramirez that she had been keeping a small, inflatable pool in her backyard for her grandchildren, but she had forgotten to drain it before leaving for vacation. The alligator had smelled the water and had become desperate to quench its thirst, hence its attempts to break into the house. Officer Ramirez quickly formulated a plan to lure the alligator away from the house and back to its natural habitat. He used his expertise in handling wildlife and set up a safe trap to capture the alligator without harming it. After a few tense moments, they successfully captured the alligator and relocated it to a nearby swamp. Mrs. Johnson was immensely grateful to Officer Ramirez and Jamie for their quick thinking and assistance. She promised to be more careful in the future and thanked her neighbor for alerting the authorities. Mr. Thompson, on the other hand, was relieved that the situation was resolved without any harm to anyone. The story of the alligator's attempt to break into Mrs. Johnson's house quickly spread through the neighborhood, and it became a topic of excitement and fascination for the residents. From that day on, Mrs. Johnson and Jamie formed an unbreakable bond as neighbors who had faced an unexpected and thrilling adventure together. As the sun set, Officer Ramirez left with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had safely resolved the situation and ensured the alligator was back where it belonged. And Mrs. Johnson learned a valuable lesson about the importance of properly securing her backyard to prevent any more unexpected visitors.